So at this point we're in Nuke and we're about to go through and show how we got this end result from our relatively simple startup. Now AOVs are going to be the key to all of this, and I think we might be well served if I just take a second to sort of go a bit more in depth about what they are and how we use them. Over here I've set up an example file and we'll just jump through this briefly before we head back. Now this is a different chart that we're going to talk about shortly, but it has a few different elements in it such as emissive and volume, so it might actually be a little bit better to use for our example here. Now AOVs, what are they? They are extra channels that come out at render time, simply put. And in this case we actually have quite a large selection. Now, the easiest way to think of AOVs are you have utilities, which give you sort of data that you can use for something else. Don't worry too much about what they are. And then you have two different schools of kind of thought. What we're going to talk about here is the traditional one. So traditionally, when AOVs come out, what you get is you get the image itself, and you get the parts that make up that image. So when you're building your materials, it's going to say, you know, how much diffuse do you have, how much specular do you have, emissive and volume. So what it does is it outputs all of its different components, and in its simplest way, if you were to just add all of these back together again, you would get the image that we started with. So that's the original image over here, and this is what happens when you add them all together. So if I flip between the two, you can see that it's the same. Now that is correct. That is how this is supposed to work. Now if we take this to our next step, what you can do is you can grab an element such as this specularity. So if you take this approach and you break it out, you add it all back together, what it allows you to do is to grab something like your spec gloss, add a grade node to it. So here I've just added it, and then add things back together. And what happens is between the original and when you add them all back together, your specularity has multiplied by 3. Now, just while I talk about spec gloss, I just output them together. Sometimes spec and gloss are separate channels. It's not what I needed, so I didn't do it. But hopefully that makes sense. So we have our raw components. You can make any changes that you want, and then you can add them back together. That is simply the best way to think of it. Now, the same principle is true, but minusing things. And what do I mean by that? So here we actually had nothing, so our original kind of did nothing, and we just added the 4 elements together. Here what we have is our original channel, and we're going to use a minus. And so what we're going to say is, hey, this original channel, this diffuse channel, I want to minus this diffuse from this image. And that's what we do here. And we've lost our diffuse, and this is us losing our spec and gloss, and this is us losing the volume, and this is us losing the emission. And at the end we have nothing. So you can see you can use it either way. You can add them all together, or you can minus them away from your original. Now, so there's a slightly newer way of doing things, which is what we're looking at over here, which is our light path expressions. We'll get into how to write them later, but right now all you need to know is you can output each light onto its own channel. So here you have the environment light, here you have the key light, and here you have the emission, which also counts as a light. And if you add those together, you get our original scene. Now, whilst this one is good over here, you can see that the problem is that if you wanted to increase the key, there is no way to do that. Now, these light path expressions, what they allow you to do is output individual components and then add those back together to get your original image. Now, if we hop over here, so one of the things that we're going to talk about regularly is grading those AOVs. We did it very briefly here at the beginning. We just said, oh, we're gonna grade this one here. So we're going to take this, we're going to boost it up, and we're going to add it back in. So this is something that happens all the time. And what's involved is what we've already covered. So you take the AOV that you want. Here we're saying the environment light, and we minus it from this image up here. Okay, we've covered that earlier. Same principle, just looks a little different. And then what we do is we say, oh, this AOV, this key light, I want to grade it. I want to bump it up. Exactly the same as we did over there. And then what you do is you say, and then I want to add it back in. So the image comes down here, we minus it out, and then we add it back in. That's all. And then in the middle, we just grade it. So that's it. That's all that happens. Now, there's a grade AOV node that I'm going to talk about, and that is all that is happening in the grade AOV node. If we just open the group and we dive in here, so it's exactly the same. The only thing that's a little bit different is there's some housekeeping at the bottom. One is you have this here, you've graded it, but what we want to do is we want to now put that back in to that AOV channel, because if you remember here we turned it into RGB, so here we're just putting it back into that whatever AOV it was that you took it from in the first place. That is it. So I just wanted to cover that really quick. You can go over this at your own pace, but all that's happening, regardless of how complicated it looks, is you're just getting the AOV, you're changing the value of it, and then you're adding them all back together. That is all that is happening over here. Now, that is the grade AOV node. I'm going to use that a lot, and you will use that a lot in your life. You do not need the gizmo to do this. You can just shuffle things out, minus them, add them back in, and grade them, but obviously that's a bunch of steps, so the gizmo just does that for free. Now, the second thing that we're going to talk about a lot is the CryptoMat node. Now, CryptoMat is a genius thing which everyone should use, and what it does is it gives you mats for everything in your scene for free. And a lot of people will be familiar with this, but I'm going to go over it anyway. So here we have our image, here we plug down a CryptoMat, and what happens is you get this kind of thing. So deleting the existing CryptoMat, I'm just going to put down a new one. So we're going to say CryptoMat here, and here it says, what do you want to look at? You have assets, so that is the whole tree, each tree. You have material, so these trunks all share a material, so they all look the same. And then finally you have objects, so different components that make up these trees. So you have individual leaves and stuff up here. So as you can see, this one gets a bit crazy. Most of the time you're just going to use assets, and what you might choose to do is to not output objects if it's making your master EXR too heavy. That's just a little tip, you don't have to do it. But there we go. Now, how does this work? It is relatively simple. You have a picker and a remover. If you control click or command click if you're on a Mac, get the little dropper and click on the thing that you want. There we go. So we have this tree. Now, where is the mat? You press A, look in the alpha, there is your mat. That's kind of it. You can continue clicking on as many different things as you want. They will all, sorry, my mistake, they will all appear in the alpha. If you clicked on something you don't want, you can then just control click or command click on that and then deselect the object you do not want. So that's all there is to a CryptoMat node. It's going to save you an awful lot of time if you're used to making the mats yourself. Now, as of the latest version of Nuke, I think this is actually inbuilt, but we'll go over how to install the gizmos anyway, just in case you're using an earlier version or there's something in the package that you want. Now, the last thing in our AOV tour is going to be the P tools. Now, these I also feel should be built into Nuke because they're pretty much essential. Now, what is involved here? There is a pass that you can output out of any renderer called P-World. And what that does is just tells the computer where things are in 3D space. That is useful for us because we can use it to do different things. So the first thing that we're going to put down is the PMAT node. And here, PMAT. We plug this in. I'm just going to delete this old one. So we plug it in and we look through it, and it looks exactly the same. If we double click on it, it's saying where is the position data. We click on this, we go to P-World. This is what we see. Again, we can control or command click on this, pick a different area. Nothing appears to work. We press A, we can see this little dot here. Here it says it's a sphere, so let's just scale this up. So we're going to multiply it by 5. And what happens is if we drag this around, you'll see that it is making a mat of wherever we drag it. Now, this is useful because obviously you could select something like the tree and then grade up that particular tree without having to render out a whole new mat. So that is very useful. So here we have our mat, we've selected the tree, and what we can do is we can grab something, let's say our original file, and we could say, I want to multiply you by something crazy, but I only want that to happen on the tree. And here they work together. So there's the original, here it is being multiplied, but using our PMAT, which is this thing, to just select the tree. So obviously that is also very useful. Here you have some basic controls. You can change it from a sphere to a cube, and you can change the fall off, and you can choose the different interpolation types. But that is in essence how this one works. Now, the next up in the P tool selection is P ramp, which I have done here. Now, P ramp may look very similar to depth. I'm just going to drop down a new one so that we all know what we're talking about here. Plug it into the same node. So, in much the same way, we need to tell it where the position data is. We then can have a look around and see that it's not really doing anything, so you choose where you want the ramp to start. So at the back, and where you want it to end at the front, and then we look at what we get. Now I've done it the wrong way around, so let's do that again. Back, and then front, and then look at it again. And that is it. Now, there are a couple of reasons you may want to use this instead of depth, and a couple of reasons you might not. Now, the main reason that you might choose it over a depth pass is you have more control than you would with just grading things, and you can change the fall off type, and it's much easier to sort of nudge it backwards and forwards. Now, that's a good reason to use it. A bad reason to use it is the edges. Now, this data pass, this P-World pass, does not have anti-aliased edges, which means that you're going to get these kind of funny mats over the top. So with these tools, they do come with a word of caution. You do need to pick your battles. Obviously, if you're just projecting something down here, it's pretty perfect. If you're projecting something on the edge of these leaves, it might take some finessing to hide that edge a little bit. But that is in essence what that tool does. And the main other thing is that this is a world position pass. So this is probably a better example here. If the camera moves, this will always stay at the tree. Whereas if you use a depth pass, it's the distance from the camera to that object. So if the camera moves, your mat is also going to move. And that's obviously going to be most evident when you're using something like a ramp. And in some instances, that will be what you want. In others, it will not. So last but not least, we have noise. Noise does what it says on the tin. It creates noise in the alpha channel. This is very useful if you're doing a large environment and you want to mottle the light. Traditionally, you'd have to throw a bunch of stuff up in the sky to break up where the sun is hitting and where it's not hitting. And here, if we mix it with the AOVs we output for the environment, we can actually cover a lot of ground very quickly. So let me show you how that works. We are going to do P noise. P noise is over here. Going to plug that in. We're going to take a look through it. Now, to begin with, nothing. If you remember position data, we have to tell it where to look, because this name you can make up yourself. So we look in here, and this is what we get. We have different types of noise that you can use. Obviously, you can adjust the sizes, and you can do all sorts of things with it. Now, what I've done down here earlier was I created the same kind of noise, and I actually graded that noise. Just with the alpha channel, I changed the white and the black points to make it a bit more intense. And the reason that I did that is because I just wanted to show you grading the environment. So here it's on PLO 0, which is the environment light. We have our original. We're going to multiply it, but we're going to choose to mottle it with this noise here. Now, in the dark, it's going to be a little bit hard to see, but you get the idea and the concept of what is happening with all of these. So one thing I should point out before we go further, and I forget, is that these are different families of AOVs. Now, we already spoke briefly that they work in different ways, but what I mean by that is don't mix and match them in your comp script. If you're going to work with these and change the elements and bump up the gloss, that's all fine. But then if you start going over here and adjusting these AOVs as well, they're going to act differently. And what I mean is, in this AOV over here, if you increase the specular, it's not going to know. You don't need to know all the ins and outs of it. All I'm really saying is try not to mix and match. And if you have to, just make sure you watch for artifacts on whatever it is that you've changed, because you're very likely going to get some weird values. We're going to jump back over to our environment, but I just wanted to cover quickly what all of those things were, because you will find as I go through the script that I'm constantly referring all of these. Now, just before we put the section down, I figured it was actually going to be worth going through how to install all of these. and not only put them in the right place, but actually get them to populate with their correct menus over here. So that's what I'm going to do now. If you are familiar with that, feel free to skip it. But for the rest of us, I'm just going to go through it really quickly. Okay, installing gizmos. How do we do this correctly? Now, in this case, I'm going to use, I'm just going to close Nuke for a second. And what we'll do is you need to navigate to your .nuke folder. Now on a Mac, you just need to go to your user directory, and then there's you need to show the hidden folders basically. So if you press Shift and hold down Command and press period, you will toggle them on and off. You know if you've done it correctly because you'll get these grayed out folders. Double click on .nuke and you will see something like this. Now in this particular case, these things have already been installed, so I'm going to delete everything and we're going to start over. So delete all of this. This is all the stuff I put in before, and that is it. To prove that I have reset everything, I'm just going to launch Nuke, and if this is going correctly, we should not have any extra menus or be able to launch anything extra. Okay, no menus. And if I try and do pramp, for example, there's nothing there, or pmat. Okay, so fresh version. Now I already kind of gave it away. We need to go to the .nuke folder. Just quickly before we jump on, if you're on the PC, you go to your username as well, and you will also see a .nuke folder, but you do have to show hidden. On a PC, to show those hidden folders, we're going to go to Appearance and Personalization, File Explorer Options, Show Hidden Files and Folders. So you click that, it'll allow you to turn it on. You'll be able to see your .nuke folder, and here you're going to see something similar to what we have on the Mac. Alright, jumping back over to the Mac. In this case, what we can do is we can drag and drop the things that we want into this folder over here. So I'm going to start with the grade AOV gizmo, and I'm just going to drop that in. Now at this point, if we're over here and we try typing grade AOV, nothing's going to happen. We're not going to see it. Now we have to restart Nuke for this to take effect. I'm going to shut it down, relaunch it. Now if I try grade AOV, you can see nothing is there. If I click on this over here and I go to all plugins and press update, it will scan the directory and we will see grade AOV. It has appeared. Now obviously we don't want to go here every time and do update plugins, and also we would ideally like to have a menu where we can click these things. So that's what we're going to do next. To do that, the easiest way to show you is actually to follow along with the instructions for Cryptomat. Now as I did say, Cryptomat does come as standard in Nuke 13, but if you're using an earlier Nuke, or perhaps you need something specific that you are downloading from PsyOps, we're just going to run through how to install that anyway. Now, it makes life easy for us because we have the Cryptomat master here. I'll stick that in the this installing gizmos folder, but just remember, going to the website is always going to be better because often it updates, and that's going to help us out. So in this case, we just go to Cryptomat master docs and we look at Nuke, and if we look at the instructions here, download the whole thing, copy the contents of the Nuke folder from Cryptomat to a folder in a Nuke plugins path such as your home directories.nk folder. Okay, so we'll do that first. It says grab all of this and drop it here, which is what we're going to do. I'm going to replace anything I accidentally left behind, and that is it. Let's jump back over to the docs and finish reading what it had to say. If your destination folder already contains an init.py or menu.py file, open those and then basically add the text afterwards. Okay. And then after launching Nuke, if you install the plugin correctly, you should be able to tab create a Cryptomat gizmo. Now, dropping it in is that simple, but what happened here was this init.py and this menu.py. They're the real things that we're interested in. Now, you may already have these in your folder, in which case do not overwrite them. But what are they? They're relatively simple text files that basically tell Nuke to import, in this case, the Cryptomat utilities and make them available. So init is basically the loading, And the menu is this section on the left. So what it's doing here is it says import it and set it up. Now let's make sure that's all working. So if we reboot this, and we launch it, here we go. You can see there's a new menu on the left. This new menu now has additional Cryptomatte options, and if we tab and do Cryptomatte, you'll see that we do have a selection of things that we can now use. Okay, whilst that might be good for Cryptomatte, that doesn't necessarily help us with our grade AOV, for example. Well, the idea is relatively similar, and what I'm going to do in this case is just make it easy moving forward, because dropping everything in here, as you can see, is going to get really ugly. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a new folder, and we're going to call one of them P Tools, and then the other one we're going to call it Third Party. All right, and the reason that I did that is because in my original text document, in these original folders, I've already written something else out that's just going to make life easier for you moving forward. So here in the init.py, it says nuke plugin, add the path, ptools. And same thing for third party. And then this is the same Cryptomatte thing that you saw before. So what it's going to do is when it boots up, it's just going to read everything that are in these folders. And that's going to make our life nice and easy. What we want to do is grab grade AOV, drop that in third party, and we want to grab these P tools and drop them into the P tools folder. Okay, great. And then the next thing is the menu. So over here, I've just tried to make things a little bit simpler. Basically, it's saying add the P tools and add third party. Now, this is the only thing that you're ever really going to have to change as you add things. You're basically saying what is in these folders. And it's saying add command, i.e. add a little button for pmat and create a node called pmat. pramp, create the node pramp, etc. So if you add something into the third party folder, you're going to put this D at the front because that's the third party one. And you'll just literally copy this line and you're just going to change these little bits of text to be whatever you are trying to add. So that all sounds a little abstract. In this case, I'm just going to grab these two, I'm going to drop them in here, and we're going to replace what's already there. We will close this down. We will open it back up again. And now you see we have extra menus. If we click on these menus, we have these P tools. If we click over here, we have the grade AOV, and you can use these either way. So just to recap, the most important thing is that you drop things into the .nuke folder. Anytime you add anything new, you're going to put it in here. In order for it to be read when nuke opens, you need to add it to the init.py. The easiest way to do that is just to say nuke.plugin add path, and then make a folder and drop things in that folder. Another thing you may want to consider is making a shelf button over here so you don't have to do plugins update every time. And the way that you do that is going to be basically copying this text. You can also do this yourself if you wish. There's obviously a lot of documentation on Nuke's website, but I find just making a folder and adding a line to the bottom here is going to be the easiest and quickest way to keep everything organized. So hopefully that helps you get to a good place. And after you've done all of that, we're going to launch Nuke and jump into our little session.